Joining us now, Democratic Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger, a former CIA case officer who serves on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Congresswoman, thank you very much. And we're just also learning more about this meeting with Lavrov, but also what the White House press secretary said at the briefing. This is Jen Psaki with a very stern warning.
We're now at a stage where Russia could at any point launch an attack on Ukraine. I would say that's more stark than we have been. In terms of the decision to evacuate their embassy or to move personnel out of their embassy, we have information that indicates the Russian government was preparing to evacuate their family members from the Russian embassy in Ukraine in late December and early January. We certainly would refer you to them for more specifics about what their decision is, but we don't have an assessment on why in the meeting.
You know, part of this could be mind games because they've been doing so much disinformation and misinformation to get the Ukrainians, to destabilize the Ukrainian government and rile up the public there as well. Congressman?
That's right. And I think that the important piece here is that I'm sure that our intelligence community members are hard at work, doing that next step of assessment. Why is it that the Russians are taking the steps that they're taking? Should we be reading anything into that? What does this mean for, frankly, the discussions that Secretary of State Blinken will be having on Friday with Foreign Minister Lavrov? I think notably, not only is the Secretary meeting with President Zelensky, but also with the Foreign Minister of Germany, and leaders from France and the UK as well, headed into that meeting on Friday with Mr. Lavrov. So this, to me, continues to symbolize and demonstrate that the diplomacy is ongoing. But certainly, my expectation and for your viewers is the ongoing efforts to collect information about what might be the Russian plans and intentions continue to be happening behind the scenes as we also engage in very strenuous diplomatic meetings and efforts.
Well, it's notable because I was covering Secretary Blinken in Sweden when he met with Lavrov, and it was, very, very stern, and obviously there was very little progress, and then the Russians were saying it's all over. So for this call to take place today and for the talks to resume and be added to his trip to Ukraine, following his trip to Germany to brief the allies and make sure that they are rock solid behind all of this, is important. There's a Senate delegation that was just in Ukraine this week, as you know, bipartisan, and they are calling for an increase in the military support to Ukraine. Do you support that? Would the House support that, do you think?
I think in principle, yes. And I think that this Senate delegation is a very important sign of congressional support for our relationship with Ukraine, for our bipartisan Democrats and Republicans going to Ukraine to demonstrate our support, certainly discussing what might be necessary in terms of funding or other support as they continue to see heightened Russian aggression. I think the value here is that we have a united voice, and certainly on the House side of the Capitol, we're having classified briefings this week for members of the Foreign Affairs Committee to keep apprised of some of the ongoing yet classified elements of these larger discussions. But I do expect this to be our support to Ukraine to be a primary issue that we're discussing here on Capitol Hill this week. And certainly that visit of our Senate counterparts is an important one to reaffirming U.S. support for Ukraine and stability in the region.
Now, back on Capitol Hill, you've introduced legislation a year ago, actually, that would ban members of Congress from trading stock and require all Congress members, their spouses, their dependent children, to put investments, certain assets, into a blind trust. Why do you think it's needed?
It's needed because, as we saw in the early days of the pandemic, when there were reports that various members of Congress and senators were making stock purchases in pharmaceutical companies or selling off other types of stock, the general assessment of the American people was, of course, here we are in the early stages and confusion of a global pandemic, and we have members of Congress who are off buying, selling, trading stock. And it was that disappointment that we saw the American people express, and not just disappointment, but acceptance that, of course, that's what we're doing. Of course, that's what we would expect of members of Congress. That's what we have to get at. It is that assessment that people have that they don't think members of Congress are working for them. And frankly, we have access to information on a daily basis that the public may or may not have access to. We have votes on bills that may or may not move the market in terms of where we as a nation are investing or not. And the fact that we currently can own individual stocks and buy and sell based on what we know or based on our day-to-day, even where there is not a conflict, the perception that there is a potential conflict, the reality that there is a potential conflict is what we have to get at. And if we can take this affirmative step to say members of Congress absolutely should not be buying and selling individual stocks when they have access to this information, when they are taking votes that could move the market, like that's an affirmative step that we can take to demonstrate to the American people that we are deserving of their trust. It's one that I think we must take, and it's one that is incredibly important throughout different industries in finance and journalism, that there are restrictions put on the types of investments or types of personal activities related to finances that individuals can take, because the idea is to remove not just impropriety, but the perception of impropriety. And that's what we must do here on Capitol Hill. We have to demonstrate that affirmative step. We've been working now with Senators Ossoff and Kelly. They've introduced a companion bill to our legislation here in the House. And we have really broad bipartisan support. I co-led this bill with Congressman Chip Roy from Texas, a member of the Freedom Caucus. So we really span the gamut in terms of ideology. We have members who've been in Congress for years, members who are new, members from the East Coast, the West Coast, across the ideological spectrum. This is a unifying piece of legislation, and it is an important piece of legislation that I believe we must move forward so that we can affirm to the American people that we are working on their behalf day in and day out, and we are removing even the potential for a conflict of interest.
Now, let me also ask you about some of your fellow Congress members from districts such as yours, which is a swing district, and you're from a state where the Republicans just won the governor's, the state house and the legislature after Joe Biden had won it by 10 points. So Virginia's a tough place for you. Some of your fellow Congress members are supporting stripping some of the more popular items out of Build Back Better, pre-K, prescription drugs, extending the child tax credit, perhaps, doing some of the things that are more popular that have bipartisan support and might get passed more quickly than Build Back Better, which in its current size doesn't have a chance.
Well, certainly I was proud to vote for the Build Back Better framework out of the House, send it over to the Senate. But at the end of the day, our charge here on Capitol Hill is to pass legislation and send it to the president's desk. And so when we're talking about things like extending the child tax credit, universal pre-K, lowering the cost of prescription drugs, those individual items on their own would be transformative in how they would impact people across the United States. And so if we could pass a bill or individual bills in the House and in the Senate and send that legislation to the president's desk on any of those issues, on addressing and fighting climate change, right, another large element of the Build Back Better Act, any of those things in isolation would be amazing successes. And so all of the pieces that we can move forward, that we can get to the president's desk, I believe that we should move in that direction. And then we keep working for the other priorities that we put forth in the discussions and negotiations toward the Build Back Better Act. It is, in fact, succeeding, delivering for the American people, and then talking about what we want to do next and working towards that next step forward.
Did the president take on too much when he didn't really have a mandate? He has a 50-50 Senate. He didn't have a mandate to do things that big, as some are arguing. And did he need to take things one step at a time and not spend as much time as he spent this summer and as the Congress spent on Build Back Better?
I think there's always significant benefit in setting the bar very high and talking about all the things that we want to do and intend to do. But I think that when we look back at what we've accomplished so far, the American Rescue Plan, delivering support to small businesses, individuals, the refundable child tax credit, major investments to our schools, our localities that have just been, lifesavers for so many of our communities. That was an incredible success that has helped us on our way to getting kids back in school safely, to help small businesses survive, to help families survive some of the toughest days of the pandemic. the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act has delivered and will deliver incredible investments in roads, bridges, waterways, mitigating the impact of lead pipes, delivering additional investments in broadband connectivity, which is such a major issue across the rural communities that I represent, right? What we have done so far has been incredible. And certainly the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was the president in the middle of those discussions back and forth between Democrats, Republicans, House and Senate, making it happen. And so then moving forward, I think taking the same tact with Build Back Better, there are so many elements that so many Americans want to see move forward. And so I think it's correct to have, to set our sights on priorities, both present, immediate, and down the road. But at the end of the day, we also have to focus on delivering, showing real results, which, again, we have with American Rescue Plan and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment Act, but getting the most kind of transformational elements, the foundational pieces of the Build Back Better Act passed, and then continuing to negotiate and create pathways for other elements that we, of course, have discussed as part of the president's agenda or priorities here on Capitol Hill. Like, that's the next step.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much. Always good to see you, Congresswoman. Thank you very much for being with us today.